So thank you for coming to today's webinar. My name is Jamie Clarkson. I'm Project Officer here at Vidra, working on the Great Global Nurdle Hunt project. I'm also joined by Heather McFarlane, who's project manager of the Great Nurdle Hunt, and you'll be hearing from her a little bit later. We have a packed agenda for you today. We'll be running through what are nurdles, just for those who are maybe still unfamiliar with them. We'll then be giving you an overview of the Great Global Nurdle Hunt and the Great Nurdle Hunt project. We'll then be diving into the results from this year's Great Global Nurdle Hunt before looking at solutions to pellet pollution, discussing some of the opportunities to address nurdle pollution in 2024, and why 2024 is such a big year for addressing nurdle pollution, and then looking at how you can engage and take next steps in addressing nurdle pollution wherever you are. And then we'll close off with a Q&A. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat as we go forward, and we'll come to them in the Q&A session at the end. Okay, so first of all, for those unfamiliar, what is a nurdle? For those of you unfamiliar, nurdles are small plastic pellets about the size of a lentil, and also called nurdles. And they are the plastic feedstock, the raw material that nearly all plastic products are made out of. So everything from computers to plastic bottles come from nurdles. Nurdles, however, trillions of nurdles spill into the environment each year, and these come from sources throughout the global plastic supply chain. This can be from nurdle production sites, plastic industry sites, spills during transportation by land and sea, during plastic conversion from the nurdles into the plastic products, at recycling centres, and at all points in between where nurdles are handled. Each year, it's estimated that enough nurdles spill into the environment to cover an area the size of Barcelona. However, 95% of this is preventable with effective preventative measures put in place. Once nurdles enter the environment, they are extremely difficult to remove and can spread far from their original source of pollution. They impact wildlife, communities, and health. Wildlife can mistake nurdles for food, ingesting them. This can damage their internal organs and gives them a false sense of fullness, which can lead to starvation, as well as introducing plastics into the food chain. As plastics break down in the environment, as the nurdles break down in the environment, they also release smaller fragments of plastics, which can also then enter the food chain, as well as releasing chemicals that are harmful to health. Additionally, chemicals, bacteria, and pathogens already in the environment can adsorb onto the surface of nurdles, creating a toxic cocktail on the surface with further health impacts for those who ingest them. It's not only health as well that's impacted by nurdles. Communities' right to a safe and healthy environment is also damaged by nurdle pollution, as well as being detrimental to local economies, particularly, for example, fishing and tourism industries, with evidence of this seen as an example after the Sri Lanka Express Pearl disaster in 2021, where thousands of fishers were unable to work as a result of nurdle pollution. So what is the Great Nurdle Hunt project? It's a global movement to end nurdle pollution. The Great Nurdle Hunt is Vidra's citizen science project, gathering evidence of nurdle pollution from around the world, raising awareness, and calling for change. Anyone can take part in the Great Nurdle Hunt, anytime, anywhere, but each year we host our Great Global Nurdle Hunt, an awareness month event where we aim to focus attention and raise awareness of nurdle pollution around the world. Volunteers and organizations head out searching for nurdles wherever they are and report their finds to our nurdle map. This evidence of nurdle pollution and the data they collect is then used by NGOs and researchers and other organizations in their work towards ending nurdle pollution, as well as helping raise awareness and calling for change of nurdle pollution. This year's Great Global Nurdle Hunt took place between the 1st and the 30th of September. Over the course of the Great Global Nurdle Hunt this month, volunteers and organizations headed out searching for nurdles around the world. This year's nurdle hunt saw nurdle hunts in new countries and countries where hunts had happened before, as well as new and experienced nurdle hunters and organizations heading out and looking for nurdles and calling for change. So, the results from this year's nurdle hunt. This year, the response has been phenomenal, with 257 nurdle hunts taking place throughout September across 29 countries. Over 1,300 volunteers have taken part, and 56 organizations. Many of these nurdle hunts also happening during difficult conditions, which many have experienced this month around the world. I want to say a big thank you to all the organizations and volunteers who have taken part in the nurdle hunt this year and have taken the time to log their results onto our nurdle hunt map. We also saw many fantastic social media posts and some fantastic, very creative posts going out as well. I want to say a big thank you to all these people as well, because this really helps raise awareness and spread the word of nurdle pollution. And these have been really quite inspirational and fantastic from all of the people who put the effort in creating them. We're also aware that some volunteers and organizations were not able to submit their nurdle hunts before the deadline for these results this year, or have not yet got around to it, but that's totally fine. Please do keep submitting your results, and they'll go into our annual data. So if you still have any results, please do submit them to our nurdle hunt site. Every nurdle hunt helps, and all the data is all valuable. I also wanted to just share an image of some of the great groups who have taken part this year from around the world. We've had nurdle hunts from Australia, in Canada, we've had them all over, from Mozambique up into Scotland and Denmark and beyond. So really want to just a big thank you to everyone who's taken part in this fantastic effort this year. So, in terms of the nurdle hunts, 90% of nurdle hunts this year found nurdles. Of the countries who were surveyed this year, 97% of them found nurdles. The only country which took part which didn't find nurdles was Guyana. Nurdles were reported for the first time this year in Mozambique, and we also want to say fantastic effort from many organizations, with Menos Plastico is Fantastico managing to report the most nurdle hunts from any organization, with 19 over the course of September, but also great efforts from A Greener Future in Canada and Plastic Free Seas in Hong Kong. But an amazing effort to all organizations and volunteers who have taken part this year. And this really helps illustrate the global reach and the global calls for change. So how does this year's results compare to the results from previous years? Since the Great Nurdle Hunt started, there has been 7,949 nurdle hunts reported, which is staggering. Nurdle hunts have taken place across 81 countries, and nurdles have been reported on every continent except for Antarctica. 87% of all nurdle hunts that have taken place have found nurdles, and nurdles have been identified from Fiji to France, and from Scotland to South Korea, and many places beyond. 2024 saw the first time that nurdle hunts took place in Guyana, Mozambique, the Philippines, Guatemala, and Cape Verde. And this again really highlights that this is a global movement and you're all part of, and really helping to call for change around the world. We'd like to thank everyone for taking part. Between 2013 and 2024, there have also been 69 major nurdle spills around the world, both on land and at sea. Major spills incidents include the Express Pearl disaster in Sri Lanka and the spill in Durban in South Africa, and in Galicia in Spain. And these are some of the images from the Galicia spill and from the Express Pearl disaster spill in Sri Lanka. Every nurdle hunt helps gather information of nurdle pollution and shows we want change. It's vital to continue to submit nurdle data as we continue to build evidence of the true extent of nurdle pollution. And here you can help us by filling in the gaps on our nurdle map. Please be sure to check our website and see if there's been any nurdle hunts near you. And if not, you can help us by doing a nurdle hunt and putting your pin on this map. As you can see from this data of the last 5 Great Global Nurdle Hunts, the percentage of nurdle hunts that have found nurdles remains high, with the last 3 years finding 90% or above of hunts that happened during the Great Nurdle Hunt, finding 90% of them finding nurdles or above. How does this compare to all of our nurdle data? Over the last 11 years, it shows us that nurdles finds remain high, with all nurdle hunts every year above 80%. This shows that nurdle pollution levels remain high and as nurdles continue to enter the environment and are not going anywhere. We know that this methodology has its limits, but this really helps illustrate that nurdle pollution is still very prevalent and is not going away. The Great Global Nurdle Hunt wouldn't be possible without the amazing work of volunteers and organisations around the world taking part. Between 2013 and 2024, over 23,000 volunteers have taken part in over 400 organisations. A massive thank you to everyone who's taken part, taken their time, and continues to support this project. We couldn't have done it without you. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please contact us at the email address attached there. You can view all of our past webinars on our Vidra YouTube channel, and is a really good source of information on all sorts of topics around nurdles, from how to nurdle hunt to how to use data to policy and solutions. You can also find, if you're an NGO, lots of information resources on our hub, our NGO hub at the website below. Or if you just want to learn more about nurdles, please visit our website at nurdlehunt.org.uk. With that, I will pass on to Heather McFarlane to
Right, can you see my screen okay?
Oh, it's the looking at the PowerPoint screen. That's right.
That's got it? Great.
Yeah, good.
Well, thank you for that fantastic overview, Jamie, of the nurdle hunts this year. It's absolutely thrilling to see so many nurdle hunts being taken part, and the fantastic images, social media and events that have taken place. Obviously, it's really disappointing that we still see nurdle pollution all over the world, and those nurdle pollution levels remaining really high. At Vidra, the organisation that runs the nurdle hunt, we're really keen to start turning this data around. And the way that we think that this can be done is by pushing for policy change. Over the last more than 10 years now of the nurdle hunt, we haven't seen nurdle pollution really decrease, despite industry voluntary efforts to bring in measures. But because these efforts have been voluntary, they haven't been taken up across the supply chain. And we think that the solution to this is really pushing for legislation, regulation, international agreements that really make sure that the industry changes its practices, and that applies right across the supply chain. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking you through what we sort of think are some good examples that we've seen other people using with the nurdle hunt to do this advocacy for pellet policy change. So this policy to prevent pellet pollution is really what we're aiming for. As Jamie said, nurdles are nearly impossible to remove entirely from the environment once they're in there. There is a case for obviously cleaning up big spills or particularly contaminated sites, and that is an important policy solution as well. But we think prevention is key. And to get policies that actually prevent pellet pollution, I've kind of grouped it into 4 things that I think we need. Evidence, and the nurdle hunt provides that, both in terms of numbers and pulling together reports, but also the fantastic images and case studies and quotes that we get from you all. when we're asking for policy change, we need to have solutions. We can't just flag that there's a problem. We need to say this is how to solve this problem. Crucially, we also need engagement where we bring people and policymakers together. So the fact that over the last more than 10 years now, we've had over 20,000 volunteers taking part in the Nurdle Hunt shows that people are engaged with this issue. It shows politicians that people care, and each of you taking part and bringing other people into your events, whether that's members of the public or even sometimes politicians themselves, or talking about it on social media and the press, shows that this is an issue that people care about and that policymakers need to pay attention to it. And I think the final thing that you always need when you're trying to push for policy change is opportunities. So I'll talk you through some of the pellet discussions that are going on this year, and that could be good opportunities to push for this change. So what are these solutions to pellet pollution? How are we going to prevent pellet pollution? Well, there are many different solutions, and it's not a case of just having one. We do need limits on production of plastic overall. If there's less nurdles being produced, there will be less escaping into the environment. Even just if a tiny percentage of nurdles are escaping, if we keep having more and more plastic produced, this problem is only going to get worse. But crucially, we need legislation that requires pellet containment on sites and in transport. So keeping pellets within the plastic supply chain so that whatever pellets are produced and that we do need for plastic, that they aren't lost to the environment. Keep that feedstock in the system rather than taking oil, recycled pellets or bio-based materials, turning them into plastic and putting them straight into the environment before they've even been made into anything. It's a huge waste of resource as well as a massive environmental issue. We also think that classifying pellets at sea is a crucial part of this, and we know many organisations are working with the International Maritime Organisation to push for this, particularly following that disastrous spill in Sri Lanka. On land and at sea and in transport, we need to have supply chain standards, certification and reporting. And these are standards that for having pellet prevention measures in place. So this is something we often call the supply chain approach, where everybody in the supply chain has to demonstrate that they have implemented measures that prevent pellet loss. So that could be changing equipment, and tweaking it so that you have secure baffles around equipment so that you have filters and drains. It could be making sure that you train your staff or have spill response kits on site so that it never reaches the environment. And all of that has to meet specified standards and be certified, independently verified and reported on. And there's also things we need to do to reduce plastic use and demand overall, as I said, to sort of bring the overall nurdles out there down, and increase reuse, recycling and pellet control measures. But crucially, that recycling needs to be safe. So while we do want to make a circular economy, we need a safe circular economy. And recycling on its own is not enough. It has to be combined with reuse and limits on production and reducing plastic use and demand. So those are some of the solutions that we see and the policy things that we're aiming for. And there's more information about all of this on our hub. And there are briefings, reports and information, not just from FIDRA, but from many different organisations that are real experts on this. So if you want to find out more about any of those solutions, please do go to the hub. So what are the pellet advocacy opportunities? How do we get these solutions to actually happen? Well, in 2024, we have the UN Global Plastics Treaty negotiations, and the fifth and what should be the final round is called the INC5. So that's happening in November, and there is some draft text within that on pellets. And if it is strengthened and retained, it could help address many of these different issues. So there are other parts of the text that talk about limits on production potentially, and as well as these pellet control measures. So I think this is a real opportunity for us to get governments across the world to agree to some of these measures. There's also an EU pellet regulation proposal which again, if it is strengthened and effective, is going to be focusing around this supply chain approach of getting all the different parts of the supply chain to have pellet prevention measures. Another thing that is going on at the moment is the International Maritime Organization is looking at classifying the different classifications of pellets and different options for preventing pellet loss at sea. We're also aware that in different parts of the world, different bits of legislation are being discussed. France already has some legislation on pellets, but it doesn't necessarily go wide enough and needs to be backed up by some of these other measures that we've just been discussing. And there are other discussions in other parts of the world about bringing in national legislation. And ultimately, if the UN Global Plastics Treaty is successful, it will then be up to governments to implement that in their country and bring in mandatory measures. So it's not a case that we need one of these and not the others. We need all of this to happen if we want to prevent pellet pollution. So how are we going to do that? Well, we need some engagement opportunities with policymakers and showing that the people care about it. So we've seen in the past, for example, this is a photo of a beach in Scotland, local to us, and it's us taking some civil servants and the head of Marine Scotland at the time out on a nurdle hunt. We've also taken the results to COP26 and directly to the UN and at side events, informal side events at the Plastics Treaty. So we were there in Kenya last year talking through some of the findings so far. And we know that many of you have taken out your local politicians and used the nurdle hunts themselves as an opportunity to raise awareness of pellets and show people the problem firsthand. It's very hard to unsee this problem once you've seen it. So the events themselves are a great opportunity for advocacy. But there are lots of other things as well. If you can't get your local politicians or industry out to an event, there's using press and social media and sending on joint letters and briefings to delegates, for example, for the Global Plastics Treaty or your ministers and local politicians, and sharing the case studies, data, reports and images. So sharing that evidence that we now have of how big this problem is. So on to the evidence. I wanted to point out that the nurdle map is fantastic and it shows quite clearly that this is a global problem and some of the places where this problem concentrates. But it is more than just a map. It's more than just pins on the map. If you're advocating for change, we need the numbers, we need hard numbers, and we need some great visuals as well. So if you want to download any of the images that have been shared with us that have come from the nurdle hunts, you can find those on the hub. So some of the fantastic images really show how big a problem this is. We also have things like infographics that you can use, some of which are language free, allowing you to put your own information on if you wish and explain it in whatever language you need to engage your policymakers. So please do make use of these resources. Many of them have been kindly shared by NGOs and individuals around the world for us all to use in our own work to end nurdle pollution. We also have even more evidence out, not just from the nurdle hunt, but from mapping our report that we produced last year with Oracle environmental experts. They mapped the global plastic pellet supply chain. So you can see on this map, this is the distribution of the global plastics industry. And it shows that high concentration in North America and in Europe, and also there's a bit of a concentration as well of the plastics industry in Asia. And that maps really closely onto the nurdle finds that we've been seeing as well. But just a caveat on this data, there is a lack of transparency in the industry. So this is an underestimate of all the plastic industry locations. It was particularly hard to find out where plastic pellets are converted into products. It was much easier to see the big petrochemical production sites. It was also a little bit more difficult to find out the recyclers that might be producing pellets, flakes or powders. But I think this gives you an indication of where the plastics industry is and where you're likely to find nurdles. But it's not just where it is at the moment. And by looking at the trade routes, we can see that even those areas that do not have a high volume of plastic production or are still at risk. So this is what we've seen with the spills going across Asia, and with Sri Lanka in particular being impacted by one of the major global trade routes. So again, we mapped the global plastic pellet supply chain and looked at the trade, and you can see a number of spills have happened on those. This can be particularly detrimental if you are a country that is reliant on tourism or on fishing, as it can close fisheries and tourist beaches if you have a major spill. So we have this evidence as well as the evidence from the Nurdle Hunt that you can use in your own advocacy. So you can produce case studies and really zone in on local areas. So this is from the mouth of the River Itchen in the UK in Southampton. And the nurdle industry has been mapped against plastic pellet fines and protected areas. And you can see that protected areas are not protected from pellets. This is a transboundary issue that really reaches into nature reserves, fishing areas, communities that can rely on those industries can be impacted as well. So these are some of the useful things you can do with the data that really bring home what the issue is and how it impacts in your area. Producing these maps is really simple to do because all of the Nurdle data is available and free to use for you to use, as is much of the data from that mapping report. There is more information on how to use Nurdle Hunt data to communicate the pellet pollution crisis in a previous webinar that you can find on our YouTube channel. And that talks you through how to produce some of these maps and some of the different ways you can think about presenting that data. As I mentioned before, we also have resources on each of these different policies, areas and advocacy opportunities that are coming up, whether that's the EU regulation proposal or the Global Plastics Treaty, and the different policy options that are out there. So please do make use of the briefings that have been shared with us on the hub and have a look at some of those if you would like more information. We'll also have some more resources coming very soon. As we've heard, the Nurdle Hunt report for 2024 will be coming out today. So you are having a sneak preview right now. So please do take a look at that. We're also going to be producing plastic pellet primers templates for countries, taking the data so that you can produce things for your delegates going to INC5. That Global Plastics Treaty final round of negotiations. We'll also be producing a briefing ahead of that so that you'll have information available on what it is in the treaty text that needs to be kept in there, what needs to be strengthened, and it will be a useful introduction to the issue, particularly for those governments that are going and may not know a huge amount about this issue already. There is further information available sort of behind the scenes for those that really want the technical information, and we can certainly put anyone in touch with the real experts on the legal text and what that text needs to say should they need it. We'll also be doing some webinars ahead of the INC5 negotiations, this final round of the Global Plastics Treaty for NGOs, so watch out for those. And there'll be more resources coming soon from whatever you produce. As I said, the hub is a hub of information, not just from FIDRA, and it has resources on there from a range of NGOs. So if you have produced something and you would like to share it with others to inspire them, then please do share it with us and we can add it to the hub. It's really, really useful to others to see different approaches, different ways of presenting the information, different policy asks and how it's done. So if it's an image, if it's a briefing, a report, whatever it is, please do share it. We really love seeing what you do with the data, with the images, with the infographics, and we'd be very grateful for anything that you are able to share. So that's all I wanted to say about the results. Thank you to everyone again for taking part in the Great Global Nurdle Hunt this year and in all the previous 11 years, as well as thank you to everybody for sharing your resources so generously and sharing your expertise across the Nurdle network. I think we've seen some great resources produced already, and I know that there is more to come. So thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming along to today's webinar. We will be, as it says, releasing the report later today, so please keep an eye out. It'll be going up on our website, and it will also be going up onto our social media, sharing links on social media. And yeah, please share it with your networks. And if you have any questions, please contact us on the info email on the FIDRA site. And without further ado, then I'll bring that to a close. So thank you all.